Hello, I'm Jean-Philippe Courtois. Welcome to the Positive Leadership, the podcast that helps you grow as an individual, as a leader, and ultimately as a global citizen. To build a more inclusive, healthy, sustainable society, we need to help everyone get the skills needed to thrive in the digital economy, which includes becoming lifelong learners. So, in an era where students learn through their devices, what role do schools play and what kind of schools are we talking about? And how can education evolve to keep up the demands of a rapidly changing workplace and the big global challenges we face like climate change, among many others? It is something I'm very passionate about, both as a co-founder of my foundation, Live for Good, but also as the chair of a business school, Schema. And I believe we need to rethink the promise of education to support a more purpose-driven society and a more inclusive education system, so nobody is left behind. These are some of the questions that focus the mind of my very, very special guest today, Sal Khan, founder of the Khan Academy. A very warm welcome, Sal.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And Khan Academy is the online education platform with a mission of providing a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. Set up in 2008, the platform includes more than 70,000 interactive practice problems, as well as videos, articles on math, sciences, and humanities. It has more than 145 million registered users around the world. And today, Sal is working with more than 280 school districts in the States to help kids build foundational academic skills and make it easy as well for teachers to make data-informed decisions. He's also the founder, we'll discuss that later, of the Khan Lab School in Mountain View, California, and Khan World School, a new online school. So again, fantastic to have you, Sal, to have this conversation. I know you're someone who has always been keen to have a very meaningful life, to fulfill your potential by being what I'm calling a change maker. And I'm interested in where the desire comes from in the first place. So I'd like you maybe to start with some of your roots. I know you were born in 1976 to some Bengali parents, your mom coming from India, I think, and your father from Bangladesh. So how did your family roots and the culture around your family, siblings, and other influence your entrepreneurial approach? And did you have any role models in a family or beyond the family maybe that got you to morph from a hedge fund analyst, I think, to a social entrepreneur?
Yeah, let me see if I can connect some dots maybe. Yeah, my father came to the U.S. in 1968. For those who don't know about U.S. immigration policy, that was late 60s was the first time that they allowed significant immigration from really non-European countries. There was a healthcare worker shortage. So my father came as a doctor, and then he settled. He did residency in New Orleans, settled there. Then he had an arranged marriage to my mom in 72. My sister was born in 73. I was born in 76. My parents separated shortly thereafter. So unlike most South Asian families at the time, it was very unusual to not have both parents there. But so my mom raised us as a single mother. My father kind of became a little bit, and he passed away shortly afterwards. I think for me, from an education point of view, it was helpful. My older sister Farah was 3 years older and was just naturally a very good student, and so I think she became something of a role model for me. And also, when you go to a teacher and the teacher taught your sister 3 years before and she was bright, they just expect that you're going to do something, even if you don't show
as good as you
initial signs of it. So I think that was helpful. I think the other thing that was really helpful was, we grew up pretty, my mother worked essentially as a cashier at convenience stores and things like that. So she was working minimum wage jobs. We were living probably right around the poverty line. But the fact that we were part of a South Asian community where, all of the other South Asian kids I knew, there weren't a lot in the 80s back then. Now there are more. Most of their families, because of the immigration policy, were doctors and engineers and all of that. So I think in terms of identity, in terms of who you get to socialize with, and then when we would go from our apartment, we'd go to a party at one of their houses, and we're like, okay, I want to live like this one day. How do you get like this?
How do you get there?
Well, you have to get your education. So I think that's kind of the background. I think you fast forward to your question about maybe what inspired to go from being the hedge fund person to working on Khan Academy and then giving up the hedge fund, I think it's a recognition that my path and my sister's path and everyone I knew was so strongly supported by having a reasonably good education system. You know, the education system outside of New Orleans and Louisiana, it's not famous. No one talks about it, but I will say, and it wasn't perfect, but I had enough of an opportunity to really tap into my potential. And so I think when Khan Academy was getting off the ground, there's a couple of paths to take it. One path was, hey, it's just going to be a fun hobby for me. Another path would be maybe I could be some type of a YouTube influencer type person in education, and that would have been fun. I would have made videos all day. Another path would have been starting it as a company of some kind. But I recognize that something like education, I would have felt guilty when I was such a beneficiary of a free education. I would have, and even when I went to college at MIT, they gave me huge financial aid because my family didn't make much money. So it would be hypocritical for me to say, hey, there's something that I think I could help deliver at very low marginal cost if I can get the right philanthropic support. Let me at least try. And, you know, there could be many millions or hundreds of millions or billions eventually of students who can similarly tap into their potential.
Yeah, I fully understand that. So let's come back to the time where, because I remember listening to one of the podcasts as a guest, you talked about, I think one day, I don't know if it was with one of your cousins, and there was a discussion about, he mentioned MIT, didn't even know what he was talking about, I think, right? So can you tell us the way you start dreaming about MIT, and when the dream came true, what did that mean in your life?
Oh, yeah. Well, it was actually, I remember the day very clearly. It was with my uncle. I was 7 or 8 years old, and my mother's brothers ended up moving to New Orleans, younger brothers. And one of her brothers, one of the younger ones, he was, at the time, I was 7 years old. He must have been around 21, 22 years old. He was studying to be an engineer at the University of New Orleans. And I remember seeing him doing his homework. And I said, what is this? And he said, oh, this is my math homework. And I was like, can you teach it to me? And he's like, no, this is calculus. I remember the conversation very clearly. And I'm like, well, what do you need calculus for? He's like, well, I'm studying to be an engineer. And I was like, well, what do engineers do? And he said, well, you know, everything around you is built by some type of an engineer, everything. And then I said, well, then I want to become an engineer. And then he said, and he doesn't remember this, but I remember it very, very clearly. He's like, well, if you want to be an engineer, you should try to go to MIT. That's what he just said it like randomly.
And that was printed in your mind
and then,
at 8.
And then it was printed in my mind. I had no idea where it was, what it stood for or anything, but my uncle, in whatever, it must have been 1983, convinced me that that's the best place to go if you want to be an engineer. So I said, that's where I want to go. And so it was there, and then by the time I got to high school, I knew what it was, and that's when I realized that it was not a joke to be able to go to a place like that. That's when I got a lot more serious. And, you know, I honestly, this is where I give my sister a little bit more credit. When I found out how much it costs to go to universities like this, I said, there's no way we're going to be able to do this. So I would probably have given up on it. But my sister, who was 3 years older, she had gotten into Brown University, which is similarly, expensive, but they gave her significant financial aid. And she had loans and all of that, but they made it doable. And had she not set that example, I probably wouldn't have thought that it was doable. I didn't know that these schools would give. They were pretty generous for if you made a little, and actually they've become more generous over time. So, that was a big deal. And when I got there, I gave a address there in 2012, and I referred to MIT as it was for me it was like going to Hogwarts. It's like Harry Potter going to Hogwarts.
Of course.
It felt magical. It felt like I had found, in a typical public high school, middle school, you kind of have to play it cool a little bit. You can't seem like you're too interested in things. And even the way the classrooms are structured, you can't really pursue your passions much. But when you go to a school like MIT, everyone around you is similarly curious. There's no shame in that. And to be around peers and around faculty who are literally trying to do things that could change the world, it's inspiring, and it makes you have a higher expectation for yourself.
So it looks like there's really a family-led vocational journey to MIT between the uncle, your sister. And then we're going to talk about your cousin as well, because that's a famous story. So I'm sorry to ask you another time to tell the story. When that happened, and the way you started tutoring your cousin, I think, in math, to start the concept.
Yeah, you fast forward 2004. At this point, after getting my engineering degree, I worked in Silicon Valley for a little bit. Then I went back to business school. Then after business school, as you alluded to, I became an analyst at a hedge fund in Boston. And so I was living in Boston. And then I had just gotten married up in the Northeast, and my wife's family's from New Jersey. And so I had family visiting me from New Orleans. They first came to my wedding, and then they visited me in Boston. And the family that was staying with me was my aunt and uncle and their 3 kids. And their oldest daughter, Nadia, she was 12 years old at the time. It just came out of conversation with my aunt that Nadia was having trouble in math. So I asked Nadia about it. She said she's having trouble with unit conversion. Because of that, she was placed into a slower math track. And I don't think either of them fully appreciated that if you're put into a slower math track in middle school, it stays with you your whole life. So I said, Nadia, I want to work on this with you. I'm 100% sure you can understand this material. How about when you go back to New Orleans, I tutor you? So she agreed. I think she was skeptical, but then she goes back to New Orleans. This was, August of 2004. I just started tutoring her over the phone. We used, there was very basic forms of internet communication, instant messenger, Yahoo Doodle, that kind of thing. We used, but slowly but surely, the first 2 weeks I was just trying to rebuild her self-esteem when it came to math and science. But once that, she got unit conversion. Then I started to, get her caught up with her class. And she got a little ahead of the class. And at that point, I called up her school and I said, I think Nadia Rehman should be able to retake that placement exam from last year. They said, who are you? I said, I'm her cousin. And they let her. And the same Nadia who was originally tracked into, let's call it a remedial track, was then put into an advanced track. So I was hooked. It was a small intervention for me, so I started tutoring her younger brothers. Word spreads in my family. Before I know it, I'm tutoring 10, 15 cousins every day after work. So that's
and that was pretty intense, I guess. You did many sessions, right, to get there. It was not like just a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, in anything in life, anything in life's got to be regular, 20 minutes. Any piano teacher will tell you, and I don't play piano, but any piano teacher will tell you, you do 10, 15, 20 minutes a day of regular, deliberate practice. That's going to add up. So that's what I was trying to do with my cousins. And my wife at the time, she was a medical resident. So she was working 30-hour shifts. So I had time on my hands.
And so what was the moment, the trigger, where after doing those experiments with the family members and more, maybe some friends, you said, hey, here comes the Khan Academy. This is my vocation. This is my life. Or was it more of a gradual process where, you iterated and decided to give it a shot?
Yeah, if you had asked me in 2003, 2004, what I wanted to do when I'm 50 or 60 years old, I always said I wanted to start a school on my terms. Because
always said that.
I always said that because I even my high school experience, I give it credit because it helped get me to where I got. But at the same time, there were many things about it that I wish that I think could have been done differently. And I did okay, but I saw many of my peers who I think could have done very well not do well. And I think it's because the way things were structured. And how they were motivated or not motivated. So I always felt that there would be a better way of doing it. And at the same time, growing up fairly humble means, having a lot of debt coming out of undergraduate and business school, I didn't think that, especially when you have a background in tech or business and you can work at a hedge fund. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go that route first. and what I would rationalize to myself is I said, I'm going to do that until I could become independently wealthy. Then once I'm independently wealthy, I'm going to start a school on my terms so I don't have to ask anyone's permission. That's kind of what I kept telling myself.
That was the reason.
When my cousins needed tutoring, there was a little bit of a motivation of like, well, if I keep telling myself this, but let me get into the problem a little bit. Let me start working on it. Then, with a software background, as we all know, if you make software that's useful for even 10 people, there's no reason why it can't be useful for 10 million people. So I started writing software for them to give them practice, feedback. Then a friend suggested that I make videos to supplement that. I initially thought it was skeptical because videos felt very low tech, but I did that, and those took on a life of their own. I just hosted them on YouTube. People discovered them. So by 2007, 2008, there were 40, 50,000 folks who were using the videos, using the software. So then I started thinking, okay, this could be one day be a real thing. I always thought I would start a physical school, but this could be a virtual school, but I still thought I was to work at the hedge fund for another 5-10 years until I could quote. I wasn't, and I am not independently wealthy. But by the time 2008, 2009 came along, and there were so many people I had frankly had trouble focusing on my day job, and I felt like there's something real here. So my wife and I, we looked at our finances. She was still doing her fellowship. Our first child had just been born in 2009. It was like, the social return on investment here is so high. Let me work on this for a year, and we'll live off of savings and see if I can find someone to support this, so that we can at least keep going. And so that's when I took the plunge. I set up as a not-for-profit 2008 with the mission free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. In 2009, quit my day job.
So basically, it gave you 1 year to kind of succeed or prove yourself that was something that could be sustainable. And you decided as well, Sal, to actually set up a non-for-profit, right? Was it something you debated in your mind in terms of the form, the shape of a social enterprise, non-profit, foundation, as opposed as a commercial business of education?
Yeah, it's interesting. The whole time I did it, I always said, hey, this is going to be something that's just, anyone should be able to access it. Like, that was my mental framework. I hadn't thought about what its corporate structure would be at the time. Then in 2007, 2008, I lived, by this point, I had actually, the firm I worked for had moved out to Silicon Valley. So I was living in the middle of Silicon Valley. And people started to reach out to me saying, hey, we think what you're doing is really interesting. And a few offered to write a check right then and there, a couple $100,000. You could support your family and work on this project. And it was very tempting. But by the second or third meeting, when we started talking about okay, well, how are you going to monetize it? What's the premium offering? What are you going to put behind a paywall, or even advertising? I was like, well, I don't want people even in the early days on YouTube, I could have turned on the ads, but I was like, I don't want someone to watch an ad if they want to learn algebra. So, and I just never turned the ads on. And so I kind of went through a mental exercise of okay, imagine a home run as a for-profit. Maybe you can become the next Facebook or Microsoft or Google. That's great. All of those types of companies are able to do huge impact at scale. But then I thought, well, what's a home run in a not-for-profit space? And there's an irony here, because in business school, when I took there's a class called Social Enterprise, which is about nonprofits. I didn't take that class seriously at all. At Harvard Business School, they don't grade you, but they'll tell you if you would have failed the class. And that's one class that I completely punted, and I essentially got a 3 in that class, which meant I got the bottom 10% because I didn't take it that seriously.
You didn't take it.
So, but there was a certain irony here in that now I said, wow, maybe the structure to do this here is like, what's the home run here? Because as my hedge fund, I would talk to publicly traded companies 5-6 a day, and I saw how capital structure and having annoying people like me calling them, really trying to figure out what their EPS were going to be this coming quarter, how much that actually drove their incentives. And even if you have a founder who has control of the organization, who has an altruistic mission, as soon as it gets sold to someone else or they become a minority voter, the company will evolve, sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad ways. While this hobby, this baby of mine, Khan Academy, I was like, well, I want this thing to be around for past me, and I want it to always be focused on this mission. And I was like, well, the only way to do that is as a not-for-profit. And imagine a home run as a not-for-profit. Not-for-profit home runs are even less likely than for-profit home runs. But when they do succeed, they transform the world. What are the not-for-profit home runs? Imagine the great universities of the world, your Oxford, your Cambridge, your Harvards. Imagine the great institutions, the Smithsonian's, the museums, the library systems of the world. And I was like, well, why couldn't Khan Academy? And it was a little bit delusional at the time. Maybe I've been reading too many science fiction books. But I said, why couldn't Khan Academy be an institution like a great university, but it exists on the internet.
Yeah.
The internet had all of the other analogs to the real world,
Yeah.
right? You could buy things on the internet. You could socialize on the internet. Why couldn't you learn on the internet? And why couldn't it be like the public school system, but at a bigger scale?
No, exciting vision. You know, as you shaped this vision, Sal, early on in the first few years, I wonder when and how you decided, because you are very articulate about what I'm calling some key principles, such as very much a student-centered approach, very much adopting the mastery learning theory, or actually more than a theory, a practice. Can you tell us more about that, the way you picked up some of those core principles, and maybe educate a little bit our listeners on mastery learning, which is something interesting I found.
Yeah, you know, well, in my own personal experience, like even when I was in high school and in college, I found that I learned much faster not going to class and listening to lectures and sitting with a textbook and just trying to go at my own pace through the textbook and doing as many problems as possible.
As you could, yeah.
And then sometimes if there were other peers in the room, asking them a few questions or me answering their questions. When we did it that way, I would learn 10 times faster. And so I had that experience. Then I also had the experience that in high school, I was, the president of the math club. So, not, but our math club was cooler than most. But the school actually took us pretty serious. They created a program. We actually almost became part of the faculty where any student who was having trouble at our entire high school was then tutored by the math club. And so we had like 70 or 80 members in our and it was all peer tutoring. And I saw time and time again these students, a lot of my classmates or some who were younger, who hated math, but they came because they had to have at least a C to stay on the football team or have a C to stay on the basketball team or be a cheerleader. So they would come to this tutoring session and I would be the lead tutor and there would be, 10 or 20 other tutors. And I saw that when you gave these students kind of personal attention and you actually explained the concepts in intuitive ways, some of these kids who thought they hated math joined the math club. So we had guys from the football team on the math club, very unusual. Because they liked it and they would come to math competitions with us because they realized that it was really interesting. So I saw that transformation.
You make it fun as well. Do you make it fun for those guys?
We made it fun and interesting. And then they just started getting A's in their math class. They showed up hoping to even pass, but once they filled in some of their gaps and got motivated, they were getting A's and they were finding it easy and they were going to math competitions. This was when I was 16 years old. I was seeing this.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
I saw the same. Even at a place like MIT, I saw the difference between students who are showing up prepared and students who are showing up unprepared. No matter how hardworking you are, if you show up at a place like MIT with gaps in your calculus or gaps in your physics, you're going to struggle. And so I found myself sometimes peer tutoring some kids in my dorm and this and that, and so it had helped them. Nadia, I saw the same thing. Nadia thought she was bad at math. A little bit of intervention of personalization. So that helped form this idea that, look, if people just had the opportunity and the incentive to fill in any gaps they have, if they have more practice and less lecture, and that practice is with immediate feedback, and it's at the level that they need, right? Sometimes we get practice on things we don't need, but practice on the things you actually need, that people can learn dramatically faster. I didn't have a word for it at that point, but I said, this is what we need to build. This is what. So that's Khan Academy. I started building. It was only about in about 2010 that I realized that this wasn't my idea. There was a word for this. It's called mastery learning. And it's arguably the oldest way of learning. And in fact, it's the way that you learn anything that is mission critical. It's the way that if you're in the military, they do mastery learning. They don't say, "Oh, you kind of know how to operate the rifle. Now let's move on to grenades." They say, "No, you need to know how to do this because your life depends on it. So we're going to work on it until you really master it." If a musical instrument, you don't just glaze over it and hope you get a C on it and move on to the next. You keep working on it. You really master your craft. Martial, I could go down the list. And in most of human history, this is the way that people learned. It was very expensive, right? If you're Alexander the Great, you had Aristotle as your tutor, and you probably had a few other tutors. Yes, they can personalize for you. They can make sure you master, military strategy or economics or whatever it is. But about 200 years ago, when we introduced this idea of free mass public education, we had to make a compromise. We said, okay, we can't give everyone a personal tutor. Let's put students in batches of 25, 30 students. Let's apply some processes to them, give them some lecture, move them together at the same pace, and every 2, 3, 4 weeks we give them a test. Some kids will do well, some kids won't. Too bad. We keep that process. After about 10, 12 years, we start sorting them out. The kids who consistently have, good grades, they will go into this field. The kids in the middle grades go to these. The other kids can become laborers of some kind. That was the Industrial Revolution, and we've essentially had that same model all the way to today. Now, what's interesting is if we were talking 100 years ago about mastery learning, we'd both agree it's a good idea, but we're like, how can you do it for every student?
Of course.
What's exciting now is with the help of technology, you can actually have one teacher with a classroom of 30, but have it a situation where he or she can actually personalize for every student. And also, the world we live in is now demanding that. It's not okay to have the Industrial Revolution pyramid of labor anymore, where most people are ending up fairly unskilled. We now need the opposite. Most people need to end up fairly skilled. So even more important that people are able to master their statistics, their math, their reading and writing.
I think it makes tons of sense. Obviously, the big challenge is how do you scale that to the entire education system, not just in the US, but in the world. That's a bigger question that I'm sure you've been thinking a lot about. I love the way you framed it, Sal, when you talked about actually it's a life-critical thing. As you talked about military and you made the analogy to education, it's life-critical for people. Each one of the kids should have a chance, in a way, to go and keep learning all the time. Now, I'd like to connect the dots between the education, learning process and the entrepreneurial process. If I may, I'd like to use the example of Sarah Sarvasti theory called effectuation. You may have heard about that, I'm sure, Sal, because you know so much about entrepreneurship as well. But for listeners, let me just tell them what it is very quickly. It is basically an approach where you identify the next best step by assessing the resources available in order to achieve your goals, okay? And it's built around a few core principles. One is bird in hand. You have to create solution with the resource you have here and now, okay? Not project yourself being rich and so on yet. 2, this is about the affordable loss. You should only invest as much as you're willing to lose. And you talked about the 1 year you had in mind about how much you could lose yourself, starting in the Khan Academy. And the third one is the lemonade principle. Mistakes and surprise are inevitable and can be used to look for new opportunities all the time. So I was wondering how some of those ideas applied, in a way that was not necessarily formal, but you just did it in your own experience. And particularly when it comes to mistake and surprise, and if you could share with our listeners, well, 1 or 2 big mistakes or big good or bad surprise along the way that got you to the next level in terms of, expanding the impact of the Khan Academy.
Yeah, I like that framework. I know it does describe a lot of not only how I operated back in the day, but frankly still do. And the only thing I would add to that is, you can be kind of a local optimizer, as you just described, but unless you have a clear goal, that local optimization can take you into random places. Yes. And in the late 90s, I did your traditional entrepreneurship, and your traditional entrepreneur, you're just trying to make a startup, and you will. That local optimization will take you here, then there. And I think what was different for me, and I think it's been key for Khan Academy, is yes, absolutely a ton of local optimization and figuring out how much I can invest while still being able to cut loose a little bit. But I also maybe added a second principle here, which I told myself this even when I quit my day job for a year. I said, I want to make this thing unkillable. So even if I don't succeed in that first year, I'm not going to give it up. It's too important. This is going to be somehow it's going to be part of my life's work. Then I'll hopefully just try to go back and get a job, a real job, and then still work on it. And then maybe in another 4 or 5 years, try again. So that's one. I guess that does go back to the, what losses are you willing to take?
Yes.
But not give up on it. And then the other one is having this very big true north that hey, I really want to have a shot at making this be an institution that helps, because look, if someone else pulls it off, that's great. I mean, that's the other difference thing about social entrepreneurship. If someone else solves a problem, sure, awesome. But I didn't think, and I still don't think, that if Khan Academy didn't exist, I don't think anyone else is actually trying to solve this very important problem.
Even today, you don't see other initiatives in the world trying to achieve kind of the same purpose in mind as well?
You'll hear, the global public education system is.
Yeah, of
but
course.
I think, and we work with them. We don't view ourselves as a replacement. But they try to, but they have a lot of inertia around the old ways, so to speak.
Yep.
And so that's why they're eager to partner with us, because we can fill in their gaps where they can. We can also be a safety net where there's not. But, there's a certain irony that in 2010, if you talk to venture capitalists, they would say the one space that they're not going to invest in is edtech. EdTech was horrible. They said the education marketplace is so bizarre. And then when we came onto the scene and we showed that there was actually scalable product market fit, so to speak, when we were scaling to million, 5 million, then all of a sudden, in a weird way, we helped unlock the EdTech
opportunity for startups.
Opportunity. And so, to your point, there are other people working on the problem loosely, primarily from the for-profit. And some are doing good things, but I think what we're now seeing is a lot of them, even though they might have started with a very similar mission to Khan Academy of like, let's democratize education, because of what their true north is, which isn't bad, it's just inevitable, they've had to go to corporate training. They've had to go to, I'm thinking of folks like the MOOCs and things like that. In order to create a return for their for-profit investors, they have to go into corporate training. I'm going to, you already have a college degree, but I'm going to give you another skill that can get you a job. And that's good. That's all important stuff. But in terms of people saying, okay, we genuinely want to make everything from pre-K through the core of college free, or as free or as close to free as possible. Let's call it accessible. And then make that a pathway. Yeah, I think there's a lot of well-intentioned people who talk about it, but very few organizations that are actually doing it.
Yeah. So I like to build on this dialogue we have on education, obviously, and particularly understand the way you've been or not influenced by, a famous author, Carol Dweck, of course, with her book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, and a growth mindset. I must say, within Microsoft, we've been quite inspired for the last almost 8 years now in our transformation by trying to challenge ourselves with a better, more open mindset from time to time, as opposed to be a rigid mindset at the times, because nobody's perfect anyways. But tell me more about the way that book and publication or philosophy has influenced or not the way you've been shaping, again, the learning process and the teaching process as well.
Yeah, and this is another one of these things like mastery learning, which I did not know about Carol Dweck and growth mindset until I became an educator, of a formal educator of sorts. But for those folks listening, it's really just this idea that in a domain, folks tend to have either a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. A fixed mindset is I'm either good at this or I'm not, maybe because of my DNA. And a growth mindset is I don't know how good I am at this. And the way I'm going to find out is I keep stepping out of my comfort zone. And I keep and I view failure as not a failure. I view it as an opportunity to grow. And Carol Dweck, not only are there all sorts of studies that people with a growth mindset in a domain are the ones who succeed in that domain, but Carol Dweck and others also show that you can do interventions to people to help them grow their growth mindset. So remind them that their brain is like a muscle. The more they use it, the stronger it gets. You have more neural connections for them when you make a mistake and you reflect on it than when you get something right. So when my whole life journey, a lot of was all about I did not realize this. I mean, in certain areas, like in sports, I probably did not have as much of. Now I have a growth mindset. I'm a pretty athletic 46-year-old now, but I was not athletic.
We talk about it later.
my only trophy in high school was I had the highest GPA on the wrestling team.
Okay.
So but actually, I'll take credit for I did have a growth mindset. That's why I joined the wrestling team, because I knew I needed to step out of my comfort zone. That was not my comfort zone to be on the wrestling team. And I always, I was actually quite shy in high school. I ran for student government. I lost. That was growth mindset. Then when I went to college, I was still kind of on the shyer side. I joined an improv comedy team. Right, like those are things that I now in hindsight realize. Okay, I was fortunate because I was pushing myself outside of my comfort zone, and so I saw that with Nadia. Like I had certain cousins. Nadia was not doing well in math, but she was willing to engage. She was willing to work with me, listen, work on problems. I had a few family members and friends who I tried to, I'm like, hey, I'm doing this thing. They're like, no, not for me. I'm not into it. I don't want to. They had more of a fixed mindset. And so I saw that. And so when Khan Academy was happening, and that's when I started to really learn about Carol Dweck and her work, I was like, once again, like Mastery Learning, there's a whole framework around this. And so it's definitely something that we've taken to heart. And I gave a talk at TED, this was 2015, about how everyone in education talks about growth mindset now. They talk about the importance of it. But at the same time, a traditional education system completely goes against what a growth mindset, right? A teacher will say, hey, you should have a growth mindset. You know, nothing's wrong with getting a question wrong. You should just try again. But then they say, okay, and here's your test paper. You just got a D. You're a D student, or you failed. Bad on you, right? You should be embarrassed. And I know teachers don't want that. That's not what they intend. Teachers want the growth mindset. But there's, the system. It's not the teacher. The system is making that happen. If a real growth mindset is mastery learning, okay, you're at 80% right now. Keep working on it until you get a 90%, or maybe move on to the next thing. But at any time, if you want to make that 80% to a 90%, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to do that. I mean, if you think about it, it's really crazy that our grade books that we have in high school and college, that you can't go back and improve the grade. You know, when I tell some educators, they think wait, that's cheating. I'm like, no, it's not. If the student really knows the material, then that C or that F in that on their transcript is actually a lie. They know the material now, but it's saying that they don't. So, growth mindset, mastery learning, two sides of the same coin.
No, I fully agree. Actually, I'm a big fan, Sal, about mentoring and coaching. It's something I do in my foundation as well, and I'm pretty deep in respecting people who can listen deeply, people who can have infinite curiosity. And I love, given the fact you discuss since inception of Khan Academy about the power of a strong mentor or tutor, depending on the words you're going to use. Actually, I'm going to use your words. How do you see that going forward in terms of the scale of the Khan Academy? Because there's a combination both of the one-to-one, which, can obviously work super well, like you did with your cousin, but how much scale can you achieve with that? But there's also the peer-to-peer, actually experience, which is wonderful, which I see with my entrepreneurs as well, such entrepreneurs. They learn so much solving problems, from each other, as opposed to ask any adult supervision in a way. So what is your philosophy and the way you see it scaling to enable a growth mindset even more, actually?
Absolutely. What we've built at Khan Academy now is the students can start in pre-K and learn at their own time and pace and master concepts and get videos and do practice at personalized. And they can go all the way into calculus and physics and biology and history, and they can do everything. But the reality is that there's very few students who will have the motivation on their own to go through all. There are examples. I mean, there's a young girl in Afghanistan, Taliban kept her from going to school. Khan Academy became her education. There was a young man who was in jail. He gets out. Even while he was in jail, he had some access. That became his education. So we have these stories, but generally speaking, the human element, the human support, mentorship, tutoring is key. I always say if I had to pick, even for my own kids, the best technology with no human versus the best human with no technology, I would pick the best human with no technology any day. So what I've always been fascinated about, okay, we're going to make Khan Academy as much content, practice, game mechanics, make it as engaging as possible. But for most students, the real place where they're still going to engage with learning is through their teachers and through their classrooms. And so that's why we've invested so much on working with the traditional public education system, making tools for teachers. They should view Khan Academy as almost their teaching assistant, as something that can assist them. And the best use cases of Khan Academy have been where peers can use it together. Where I'm working on something, but if I need help, I could go to you. And the way that we've been trying to scale that is by, we have another not-for-profit we started, a sister nonprofit to Khan Academy called Schoolhouse.world, which does peer-to-peer tutoring. And so you can be just as what I was doing in high school, but now you can do it across tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of students all over the world. So, the big picture goal is we want to let the technology do as much as possible, but then also can the technology facilitate other peer-to-peer interactions so that you can provide all the layers of support someone needs. I'll throw out, the other idea that, not just idea that we're working on, is an intermediary, which is, I think artificial intelligence is becoming very, very, very interesting.
Well, I'd love to get back to that in a few minutes, Sal, if you don't mind, because that's something pretty hot right now. I'd love to talk a little bit about positive leadership, positive psychology, which, as you know, is at the core of this dialogue I'm having actually with many guests. And, one of the first steps of practicing positive leadership is, first of all, taking care of yourself, of oneself, by working on your well-being, your physical energy, your mental energy, and basically building and managing your positive energy in yourself every single day. I understand that as an example, because I'm sure you have many other practices I'd like you to share with your listeners. You are an advocate of taking a cold shower every day or maybe a couple of times a week. I know I've tried myself. I'm not doing that every single day of my life. So can you share with us such practices? You also talk about sports that you have been raising, it seems to me, in your life as well. So what are those habits, routines you built into your daily, weekly cadence now?
Yeah, no, it's I am a big believer in some of these habits that, like, when you get your day off to the right foot, it builds momentum. At least it does for me. So,
Same.
I wake up. This morning I woke up at 6 a.m. We actually just got a dog, so I took her for a walk.
Oh, wow, wonderful!
And she's actually
a new
here
one.
Trying to
she's
eat
here.
some tape.
Okay.
That's why I'm every now and then I'm looking down. But the first thing I do in the morning, to your point, is I take a cold shower, and yes, it is jarring, right? And actually, I take a shower in my kids' bathroom because our shower doesn't get cold enough. It doesn't give you that pure cold water. So I take a shower there. And, you do it a while, you actually start looking forward to it. The first 10, 15 seconds are always hard, but that feeling afterwards, you don't need coffee, you don't need anything. You feel it, and then you're like, okay, nothing else in my day is going to be any harder than that. Then I actually am very ritualistic about making my bed, or making my wife's bed. So I do that, and then I most days I'll try to meditate about 20 to 30 minutes as well. So that's kind of like my morning thing, and then on top of that, most days. Now, this will sound kind of extreme, and please, I don't want people to take, my advice. I don't eat until I get all of my work done.
Wow. So, is it your reward, actually?
Yeah, well, I eat healthier and better when I'm more relaxed. And I tell myself, like, hey, get all your work done, and then you'll get a nice, relaxing meal. And so, I usually end up, that meal is normally dinner. So, but I find that it actually makes me more productive and clearer thinking, and now intermittent fasting is obviously a big thing, and there's a lot of data that backs it up. But those are kind of my somewhat odd rituals.
Are you also pretty religious about your sleep and the quality of your sleep, Sal?
I find everything that I just described only enhances your sleep, right? Like if you're eating well and not overeating, you're taking cold showers. You get a lot of exercise in the day. I mean, the other thing I would add to that, probably 2 or 3 times a week, I go for a couple of mile run, lift weights, et cetera, et cetera. So that whole combination, the meditation, it definitely
makes you
sleep well.
Okay. I like to talk about another support network. I was having recently Bill George, a former CEO of Medtronic and professor at Harvard Business School, and Bill has been part of a men's group for decades. And he's a huge advocate of and I think you are having as well, what is a regular meetup in your local community, if I'm not mistaken. I heard you talking about that. So can you tell me more about it? How does it work for you, and what do you get out of that, and your friends as well, as part of this regular community connection you have?
Yeah, this was a thing that, my wife and I, we both grew up in Muslim families, but neither of our families were particularly religious, and we weren't either. But we always said, there is something nice about having a religious, some type of community, in that you get together on a regular basis and you talk about things that transcend the day-to-day of paying your taxes and your career and all of that. So we said, wouldn't it be nice if we had a place where we could do that, but it isn't limited to people of your own faith, and it could be broader. It could talk about philosophy and et cetera. So One of the things that we started about 2-3 years ago is I would send out like a quote to a bunch of friends via email. And pre-pandemic, we started meeting in a park. And we would just talk about things like, purpose or ego or the nature of reality or whatever. And some of the quotes, some of the reading would be from religious traditions, but it would be from multiple religious traditions. And we would start with a meditation. And so it was a really nice thing. And then once the pandemic started, we did this over Zoom, and it was nice because we were able to get people from a broader area. So
and you continue that after the pandemic
pretty consistently. The last couple of months, we've fallen off a little bit, but I did find that by doing it, it definitely grounds you a lot better for the week.
No, I love that. I love it. And I believe deeply in that community belonging as well. Whatever you call your community, which could vary as well by country, by place in the world. I think you said at once, you said, if we want to change the world, we need to educate the world, right? This is kind of underpinning your vision. And you're clearly on a mission to do this, Sal. We talked a lot about the Khan Academy, but you've actually also expanded your impact by creating the Lab School, which is a bricks and mortar school you set up in 2014, I think, in California. You described it as a student-centered school where kids learn by themselves and teachers assist them. In a way, a total inversion of the usual power structure that you find in a traditional classroom. So can you tell us in a few words, how does it work actually in a real world, that system?
Yeah, back in 2012, 2013, I was telling the world about all these ideas, and then my own son in 2014 was going to be school-aged, and I said, I don't want to be a hypocrite. And, I wanted my own children to be able to benefit from this. And I wanted to show the world that it's doable, that you could do this in a physical environment. So that's why we started Khan Lab School. And it works pretty much as you just described, where students are able to, for the most part, learn at their own time and pace. If they haven't mastered something, they always have the opportunity, incentive to go back and master it. And what happens is because they're able to, frankly, learn more efficiently here, and they're learning for learning the material versus just getting a grade, they're more intrinsically motivated. They're more communal in that they help each other a lot. And it frees up time for other things. So more passions, more, a lot of our students at the high school, at Khan Lab School, they are doing internships that are traditionally only available to fairly advanced college students. They're starting businesses, they're doing this and that. And then once again, that's because they're not just jumping through hoops like most high school students have to. They're actually able to pursue their passions while mastering the content.
I'd like to finish with a couple of last questions, Sal. I know when you talk about the future of education, you often relate to science fiction and a vision where anyone will have access to any content to be a fully actualized person. What do you mean by that, actually? What is an actualized person? Can you make it real for us?
Yeah, well, the reason I get to that is when you think about education, it's in any problem you're trying to solve. I think it's good to always think like, what's the whole point? At first, you say, okay, education. I want to help, like with Nadia. Okay, I want to help her get good grades. Why do I want to help her get good? Well, she has good grades, then she'll have more opportunity. Why do I want her to have more opportunity? Well, she has more opportunity. She'll have better self-esteem, better relationships. She'll be able to support herself better. Okay, well, why do I want her to do that? Well, if she can do that, she'll be less dependent on other people, and she'll be able to contribute to the world. And frankly, she'll just have a happier, more meaningful life. So the goal of education is to allow more people to have a happy and meaningful life. And, I think you and we're fortunate to be, not that there's not things that we can't work on, but we are fortunate to have reasonably fully actualized lives. We have intellectually stimulating work. We get to work with interesting people, meet interesting people. We have a sense of purpose that we're able to make some positive impact. So that's all I would want for anyone on the planet.
I love it.
And and it's not even a wealth thing. That I remember Jeff Bezos, said all he wants for his children is to have a sense of purpose. He's 100% right. I see out here, out here in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of wealth, and some kids of wealth, the wealth can be very demoralizing because they lose their sense of purpose. And so, as long as you feel like, okay, I do this thing and I'm trying to do it with excellence, I have a growth mindset about it, and I can, I have a shot at contributing to the world and supporting myself and having a family, then that's a good life.
I 100% agree with you. Very last question, because it's something quite buzzy, but I think it goes far beyond the buzz. with artificial general intelligence, large language models, and of course, the infamous ChatGPT-3. How do you see the role of the teacher changing, Sal? And how will you change your learning approach, if you are considering it, for your students as they use such tools in their day-to-day activities? Because I just learned that all the universities in the world are now shutting down, of course, and prohibiting access to ChatGPT-3 to actually write your essays or some more work. So what is your point of view on the way is gonna happen within or without the control of the education system?
Yeah, first of all, I think the education system is doing the exact wrong thing, because they're essentially trying to stick their hole in the ground and hope that nothing's happening. And all that's happening is this kids are just going to get around the firewall, or if they, or just go at home and still use these models. And so they should have just rethought, okay, well, what and in the future they're going to be using these models to write papers, when they're in a work environment, white papers, etc. So it's like, I want you to embrace it, and maybe these models could actually do certain things that are enhancing of the education experience. So, ChatGPT, we've also been experimenting with other models that haven't been public yet. They are very good. Like, we are at the cusp of being able to have a Socratic conversation with, even ChatGPT can do it to a certain degree. So that's where we should be thinking about it. Hey, this is an opportunity. When we think about, like right now on Khan Academy, a teacher could assign practice exercise. They can assign a video. But what if a large language model could have a Socratic conversation with you about the video? And then what if the large language model can write a synopsis of that conversation and send it to the teacher or send it to the parent? That all of a sudden it's now truly acting as a true teaching assistant, an excellent teaching assistant. And so that's what I'm interested in, is how this could potentially be another very, very powerful modality, acting as a teaching assistant. And then from a student's point of view, a thing like Khan Academy is going to feel even that much more like a tutor or a mentor. They're going to be able to have conversations with it. So, we're not there yet. The models aren't perfect. They still hallucinate. They still make up stuff. They're infamously bad at math. But I don't think the solution is to put our heads in the ground. I think the solution is, and I think there's the essay issue. There's college admissions essay. So to me that says find something else to leverage instead of just putting your head in the ground, because what's going to happen is now just the kids who are the rule breakers are going to be the ones who are going to benefit.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much, Sal. It was a wonderful, insightful, exciting, stimulating conversations, and thanks for changing the world by educating people to be more happy and more fulfilled in their lives. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.